Welcome to today's deep dive. It is Tuesday, March 10th, 2026, and we have a really fantastic exploration lined up for you today.
Yeah, we really do.
We are going to be looking at a stack of excerpts from a pretty fascinating document called the Mastering the DBQ Rubric and Strategy Guide.
Right.
And I know what you might be thinking right off the bat. A DBQ, a document-based question. Isn't that just, something high school students sweat over during their AP history exams?
That is usually the first reaction, yeah.
Well, yes, technically it is. But we are looking at this source material today because it's actually a masterclass in something much, much bigger.
Oh, absolutely.
We're framing this not just as a high school test guide, but as an absolute blueprint for how to process an overwhelming amount of information and build a completely airtight argument.
That is exactly the right way to look at it, because whether you are prepping for a high-stakes boardroom presentation or trying to analyze a complex market trend.
Or honestly, just trying to win a debate over dinner.
Yes, even that. The skills outlined in this rubric are completely universal. Understanding the anatomy of a document-based question is essentially learning the fundamental architecture of critical thinking and persuasion.
Which we all need more of.
Right. It's about taking a literal mountain of raw data, making sense of it, and convincing someone else that your interpretation is the correct one.
Okay, let's unpack this. The rubric we are looking at breaks down into several distinct points, and the very first component it demands is a rock-solid foundation.
The anchor.
Exactly. Specifically, the thesis or claim, which is worth 1 point on this grading scale. According to the official description, you have to respond to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis or claim that establishes a line of reasoning.
That phrase is so important. Line of reasoning.
And the guide is incredibly strict about this. You cannot just restate the prompt. You have to take a position, connect multiple pieces of evidence, and actually show a logical argument.
And the source provides a really brilliant brain trick to help construct that claim.
I love the brain tricks in this guide.
They're so practical. When you are formulating your thesis, you need to ask yourself, so what?
So what?
Exactly. Your thesis shouldn't just be a statement of fact. It should answer why the topic matters historically. It has to have stakes.
Right.
If you aren't answering the so what, you aren't building an argument. You're merely making an observation.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
If I'm constantly asking, so what? Doesn't that risk turning an objective historical analysis into like a totally subjective opinion piece? How do you keep it grounded?
That is a crucial distinction to make. The rubric emphasizes that the claim must be historically defensible.
Historically defensible.
Right. You aren't being asked for your personal feelings on the matter. You're being asked to establish a line of reasoning based purely on the evidence. The so what is about significance, not emotion. It forces you to explain the cause and effect.
That makes a lot of sense. And the text actually gives us a foolproof formula to keep that objective structure intact.
It does.
It goes like this. During this time period, this specific group, event, or policy caused this action or change because this reason, and this demonstrates your line of reasoning.
It's so structured.
It is almost like Mad Libs, but for rigorous academic debate.
It's incredibly effective because it forces you to include all the necessary components of a strong, defensible claim.
Yeah.
The source contrasts some really great examples of how this plays out and where people often go wrong. Take AP European history, for instance. A classic failing thesis would be, the French Revolution occurred because people were unhappy.
Wow, which gives you absolutely nothing to work with. It's way too vague, and unhappy isn't exactly a historically defensible line of reasoning.
Precisely. It completely fails the so what test. But look at the successful example the text provides.
Okay.
The French Revolution arose from the fiscal crisis of the monarchy and social inequalities, which combined to undermine royal authority and mobilize popular uprisings.
See, that earns the point.
It absolutely earns the point. It is specific. It establishes a clear cause and effect relationship between fiscal crises and royal authority, and it gives the writer a highly specific roadmap for the rest of their argument.
You can clearly see exactly what the rest of that essay is going to look like just from that one sentence.
Right, you know paragraph 1 is going to be about the fiscal crisis.
And paragraph 2 is going to be about social inequality. If we translate that to the corporate world, it's the difference between telling your boss, our sales dropped because the market is bad.
Which no boss wants to hear.
Exactly. Versus saying, our Q3 sales declined because Supply chain bottlenecks delayed our flagship product, undermining consumer trust and driving them to competitors.
What a difference.
One is an excuse, the other is a thesis. And that leads us directly into the second foundational point, which the guide calls contextualization.
What's fascinating here is how the source defines contextualization. It describes it as placing the topic in its larger historical framework.
The big picture.
Yes. It is not just about what happened, but what conditions made this event possible in this specific time and place. You are zooming out to show the broader trends that created the environment for your thesis to happen.
I like to think of it as the opening crawl of a Star Wars movie.
That's a good way to look at it.
You have to tell the audience what is happening in the galaxy before you zoom in on the specific spaceship.
That is a great analogy. The guide gives an excellent example for AP World History regarding the Columbian Exchange.
Okay, let's hear it.
A bad attempt at context would be just saying the Columbian Exchange happened a long time ago.
Just totally useless.
Right. That gives you absolutely no connection to the broader forces at play. But the winning example, it says, in the early modern period, the expansion of maritime empires and global trade networks increased cultural exchanges, laying the groundwork for the Columbian Exchange.
So the context acts almost like a funnel, guiding the reader from a broad historical era straight into the specific claim.
Exactly like a funnel.
It reminds me of pitching a startup. If you are pitching a ride-sharing app, you don't just start by talking about the code of your app.
No, you'd lose the investors immediately.
You start by talking about the rise of smartphones, GPS technology, and the gig economy. You have to explain the conditions that make your app necessary and possible.
And there is a very practical structural tip in the guide for you here. The text explicitly reminds us that context goes in the introduction right before the thesis.
Right before.
Yes, you start with that broad time, place, and trend, and then you narrow down into your specific claim. You have to properly set the stage before you introduce the main actors.
So once we have this solid thesis and contextual foundation, how do we actually go about proving it? The rubric has a very specific way it wants us to deploy our evidence, which is the next major section of the guide.
The real meat of the argument.
Point 3 is evidence from documents, and this one is worth 1 to 2 points depending on how well you play the game. The rules are clear. If you use content from at least 3 documents to address the prompt, you get 1 point.
Just one.
But if you want to earn those 2 points, you have to support an argument using at least 4 documents.
And this is where the guide highlights the absolute most common mistake people make.
Merely summarizing the documents.
Yes. It is not enough to just say what the document is. You have to explain exactly how it supports your argument. The grader doesn't need a book report on the provided texts. They need to see you wielding those texts as tools to build your case.
The guide shares a really great structural trick here to prevent that. Assign 1 document per paragraph for total clarity.
That is such a smart move.
It keeps you organized and prevents you from just throwing a bunch of quotes into a blender. Let's look at the AP US history example they provide. Let's say your thesis is about how the progressive era was a response to economic inequality and political corruption.
A classic prompt.
The text shows how you might use 4 specific documents to prove this. An excerpt from the Sherman Antitrust Act, a photo of urban tenements, a quote from a progressive reformer, and a political cartoon about child labor.
Notice how diverse those sources are.
Very diverse.
You have a legal act designed to break up monopolies, a visual photograph showing poverty, a direct quotation, and a piece of political satire. If you just summarize them, if you write, this is a photo of a tenement and this is a cartoon about kids working, you fail the rubric.
0 points.
Exactly. You have to use the formula the guide provides. Document X shows this specific evidence, which supports my argument that reform was responding to these specific industrial challenges. You have to connect the tenement photo directly to your claim about economic inequality.
It's exactly like building a legal brief. A lawyer doesn't just hand the judge a bloody glove and sit down.
No, they definitely don't.
They have to explicitly explain how that glove proves the defendant was at the scene of the crime. Which brings us to point 4, evidence beyond the documents. I like to call this the flex point.
The flex point, I like that.
It's worth 1 point, and to get it, you have to bring in at least 1 additional piece of outside historical knowledge that is relevant to your argument, but is absolutely nowhere to be found in the provided documents.
It is the ultimate test of your preparation and broader understanding. The text breaks down some great examples of this.
Let's run through them.
If you are writing that AP World essay on the Columbian Exchange, you could bring in the encomienda system, the forced labor system utilized by the Spanish, to prove you understand the economic mechanics of the era.
Makes sense.
For the APUS history essay on labor reforms, you might reference the Wagner Act.
The labor law protecting workers' rights to unionize.
Exactly, even if that specific act wasn't in the supplied documents. Or for AP Euro, you could cite the Napoleonic Code when analyzing post-revolutionary civil laws.
But there is a massive trap here that the guide warns about. You can't just memorize a list of historical terms and drop them into your essay to sound smart.
No, dropping terms without connection is like name-dropping in a business meeting without actually knowing the person. It usually backfires.
It's so transparent.
The guide warns that this outside fact must explicitly connect back to the argument. It cannot just be an irrelevant piece of trivia. You can't just drop the words Napoleonic Code into a paragraph and expect a point.
You actually have to do the work.
You have to use the suggested phrasing from the guide, something like, additionally, this outside evidence further demonstrates my thesis connection. It is all about linking the outside knowledge directly to the core argument to show a deeper mastery of the subject matter.
So we've built the foundation and we've deployed the evidence inside and out. But the next section of the rubric is really the brains of the operation. This is about analysis and complexity. Point 5 is analysis and reasoning, worth 1 point. Here's where it gets really interesting.
It does get interesting here.
The rubric states that for at least 2 documents, you must explain how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, or audience is relevant to your argument.
This is where we transition from simply reading a document to actively interrogating it. The graders want to see that you are thinking beyond the literal text. They want to know why an author wrote something and how it fits into the exact historical moment.
And the guide provides a highly effective formula for this too, right?
Yes. Author plus role plus perspective leads to why this matters.
Let's break down the APUS history example the text provides for this formula. It mentions analyzing a speech by Daniel Webster. A basic 0-point answer just says what Webster said in the speech.
Just a summary.
But a point-earning answer says, Webster's speech demonstrates a nationalist perspective that prioritized federal authority over state sovereignty.
Exactly. You are identifying his role as a political figure, his perspective as a nationalist, and why that specific perspective matters to the broader argument about federal versus state power. Webster wasn't just a guy talking in a vacuum. He was a specific politician with a specific agenda.
Think about how vital that skill is today.
It's everything.
If you are reading a press release about a new tech product, understanding the point of view and purpose is crucial. Is this a neutral review from an independent journalist? Or is this marketing copy written by the company's PR department aiming to boost their stock price?
Such a good point.
If you don't interrogate the source's purpose, you are just blindly accepting their narrative.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it leads us directly into point 6, complex understanding. This is the final and arguably most nuanced rubric point, also worth 1 point.
And the hardest to get.
Without a doubt. Earning this requires demonstrating a complex understanding through sophisticated argumentation or effective use of evidence.
It's all about showing nuance. You have to show multiple perspectives, regional or global connections, continuity and change over time, or complex causal relationships. You can't just write a simple good guys versus bad guys narrative.
The text provides a fantastic AP World example for this. Let's say the prompt is about European colonization. Instead of just talking about colonization in a vacuum, you might compare European colonization in the Americas versus European colonization in Africa, explicitly showing the different economic and social impacts in those two regions.
So you aren't just saying they both got colonized.
Right.
You are unpacking the differing economic models. Maybe contrasting the plantation systems in the Americas with the resource extraction and administrative control models in Africa. That shows a profound grasp of the material.
The guide reminds you to always ask yourself, what's the larger significance when trying to earn this complexity point? You want to avoid oversimplifying cause and effect.
How does it suggest doing that?
It suggests using sentence starters like, in a broader context, or compared to another region or event, to force your brain into making those complex connections. It is about treating the historical events not as isolated incidents, but as an interconnected web. If you can show that an event wasn't inevitable, but rather the result of competing forces, you earn that point.
No, having all this high-level analytical knowledge is essentially useless if you don't execute it properly under pressure. The final section of the guide is the game plan and time management. Because on the AP exam, you only have 60 minutes.
Which goes by very fast.
Incredibly fast. The source runs through some of the most common mistakes students make. We've touched on a few, like misinterpreting documents or just listing them instead of analyzing their point of view. But the text also points out the severe danger of overwriting or wasting time on irrelevant background information.
That is a critical error, and it happens in the professional world all the time, too.
Oh, yeah.
The grader, or your boss or your client, doesn't want a novel. They want a focused argument. To prevent that rambling, the guide lays out a highly structured, strict time management strategy.
Let's hear the breakdown.
Assuming you have that standard 60-minute window, it prescribes exactly 5 to 7 minutes to plan. And that planning phase is highly specific. Write the thesis first, then outline your context, then create a paragraph plan assigning specific documents to support your thesis.
Only 5 to 7 minutes of planning before you start writing. That feels incredibly fast to build an entire architectural blueprint for an essay. Does the guide explain why it's so rigid?
It is rigid for a reason. If you spend 20 minutes outlining, you simply won't finish the essay. The goal is to make the thesis your anchor immediately. Once that thesis is locked in during those first 5 minutes, every subsequent decision you make is simply asking, does this document support my anchor?
After that planning phase, the text suggests spending 45 to 50 minutes actually writing the essay, and it recommends using what it calls TEA-like mini paragraphs. TEA.
Yes, TE.
That stands for Topic, Evidence, Analysis. I really love this framework. You state the topic, you drop in the evidence from the document, and you provide the analysis of why it matters.
It keeps your writing incredibly clear and precise. And frankly, this TEA framework is the secret to writing effective corporate memos or legal briefs.
It really is.
It forces you to front-load your point, back it up with data, and immediately explain the business impact. It stops you from rambling and buries any subjective fluff.
And then what about the rest of the time?
Finally, the guide dictates that you reserve exactly 5 minutes at the end for review. You need that buffer to catch grammatical errors or ensure you didn't accidentally contradict your own thesis.
So what does this all mean? If we distill the ultimate takeaway from this entire Mastering the DBQ rubric and strategy guide, it is this. A successful argument requires a very specific, repeatable recipe. It rewards a clear, defensible claim. It requires solid historical context to set the stage.
Yes.
It demands strategic use of evidence, both the evidence provided to you and the evidence you bring from your own outside knowledge. It relies on deep reasoning that questions the motives of the sources, and it requires an appreciation for the complex, interconnected nature of events.
And this is where we bring it all back to your world today. As we established, this isn't just about passing a high school history exam. The skills we have unpacked here are incredibly practical for adult life. If you are pitching a new project at work, you need a clear thesis, a defensible reason why the project matters, and a line of reasoning for how it will succeed. You need to provide context for the current market. You need to deploy evidence, analyze the point of view of your competitors' marketing, and show a complex understanding of the risks and rewards.
You really use the whole rubric.
Every single point. If you are navigating daily news, mapping out the core arguments, gathering the documentary evidence, and rigorously checking the point of view of your sources is an absolutely invaluable life skill. It is how you separate fact from fiction.
It really is a survival guide for the information age, disguised as a grading rubric.
It truly is. And this raises an important question, something I want to leave you with to mull over long after we wrap up today.
Let's hear.
This entire rubric requires you to rigorously analyze the point of view and the purpose behind historical documents in order to build what the College Board calls a historically defensible truth. Now think about our modern era. Think about the fragmented algorithm-driven feeds you scroll through every single day.
It's a lot to process.
It is. If you apply this exact same strict AP rubric to your daily media and news consumption, how many of the sources you read today would actually pass the test for helping you build a historically defensible worldview?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy but incredibly necessary question to ask. Thank you for joining us on today's deep dive. Keep asking, so what? Keep checking your sources, and we will catch you next time.